Hello, now we are going to look at integer BIMDAS and an introduction to using BIMDAS with integer numbers. So anytime we see more complicated sums where we have lots of stuff multiplied or added together or divided, or if we see indices and powers, we're going to write down our rules for BIMDAS. And if we see any complicated multiplying of positive and negative numbers, we can write down our rules to help us remember. We physically write these things on the page, so we have an anchor for our memory so that we can do everything in the correct order. And it's by writing things down that we develop that long-term memory for how these questions can be done out. If we skip writing this down when we're finding it difficult to do, then we keep finding it difficult to do. If we structure our thinking very carefully and tell ourselves the story of what we do first, then we can break big problems down into smaller parts that we're able to do. So let's start off with our question. Here we know we have our brackets, indices, multiply, divide, add and subtract. What one are we going to have to do first here? Well, I have 6 plus, so I have addition, and the plus is plus minus 3. So I see brackets sitting next to my plus. That tells me I'm multiplying. So I have to do my multiply before I do my adding. So if I look at the multiply I have to do, I have plus minus 3. So I have a few different ways that I can think about this. One of them is just to use my rule. I have a plus multiplied by a minus. There's a bracket in between them, they're multiplied. So I have a plus multiplied by a minus, so that gives me a minus. So I can use my rule to say this is going to be 6 minus 3. But can we think about why this is true? If we understand why something is true, then we are able to work with it much more effectively. If we just try to memorize things, eventually we won't be able to do lots of the questions we need to do. So can we think about what it means to have plus minus 3? So if we're adding on minus 3, well, the number minus 3 means that if we started at 0, we would walk downward 3 spaces to the left, getting colder. So we would get colder by 3. If we were at 0, our minus 3 means we go from 0 down or colder 3 spaces. So if we're adding that on to a number, that means that at whatever number we start at, we get 3 spaces colder. Well, that would mean we're subtracting the number. So that's where this idea is really coming from. So if we now know that if we're really subtracting 3 away, if we start at 6 on our number line, and we are going to get colder by 3, we're going to add on negative 3. That means we are going to end up getting colder by 3. So we end up going 3 down. So 1, 2, 3. We move 3 spaces colder from our 6, and we end up down at 3. So that's our final answer. So we're going to do our multiply first, either using our number line or using our rules. And it's important that we can visualize the number line, so don't shy away from the number line. And then once we've done our multiply, then we can do our add and subtract. So if we go to our next question, we're at minus 7 minus minus 2. We have a lot of minuses going on. But if we take each piece step by step, it's manageable. So if we have minus 7 would be where we'd want to start, and we want to minus minus 2. Well, I have to do my multiplication again before I do my addition or subtraction. So minus minus 2. So I have my rule way of doing this, minus by a minus. I have the minus sitting next to a bracket. That tells me I'm multiplying, so my multiply or divide rules apply. So I have minus by a minus is a plus, so I could have minus 7 plus 2. Write it larger like that. Again, how can we think about multiplying our minuses? Well, we're at minus 2 here. If we start at minus 2, we're going down 2 spaces from 0 is minus 2. And if we multiply by a negative number, we rotate 180 degrees around 0, and we end up at plus 2. So that's why we're ending up with this plus 2. So now we have done our multiply. Now we can do our add and subtract. So we figured out we have minus 7 plus 2. So if we start at minus 7 and we plus 2, that means we're going to get 2 warmer. So we're going to go up 2 spaces in the warmer direction. So we're going to end up at minus 5. So by breaking down that bigger problem into 2 smaller steps, it's very manageable to do, particularly if we use our number line. Now, if we have more than 2 numbers, it doesn't make any difference. We're still going to do things step by step and use BIMDAS to guide us as to what we do first. So we have minus 3 plus minus 2 minus minus 5, and we have stuff in brackets. It's worth noting we don't actually need to have these in brackets. Sometimes you will see this written as something like 5 plus minus 3. Because the 2 symbols sit right next to each other, that means multiply. But often we will use brackets. And we generally should use brackets. But sometimes you'll see this too. Now, the fact we have brackets here tells us we have multiply. So we have to do our multiply before we do our addition and subtraction. So the minus 3 is not going to change, it's just sitting there. So I rewrite the minus 3 so that I don't lose track of it. And it's critical that we write everything out each line. We don't just write the bits we're working on. We have plus minus 2. So that means that we want to, it's telling us that we're going to add on a movement in the cold direction of 2 spaces. Well, that's the same as subtracting 2. Or we could use our rule. That's going to be the same as minus 2. And minus minus 5. Well, that means we were moving down 5 spaces in the cold direction, but we rotate around 180 degrees and we end up pointing in the opposite direction. So we end up at plus 5. And now we can just start to add up what we've got. So we have minus 3. Let's start on the left-hand side first. So we have minus 3. And then we minus 2. Well, that means we're going to go another 2 spaces colder. So that brings us down to minus 5. Plus 5. And then we want to add 5. So if we start at minus 5 and we add 5, we end up at 0. If we go to our next question, we have some subtraction and some addition, but we see we have a little number up here. That means our power, our indice. So what does that tell us? We know we have to do it first because we go in our order of BIMDAS. Before we do our addition or subtraction, we have to do our indices because it's higher up on our BIMDAS. But what does that little 2 there mean? Well, it means I'm going to multiply the thing in the bracket by itself 2 times. So my next line is going to be 4 minus 10 plus minus 2 times minus 2. Now I have multiply. I need to do that first before I do my addition and subtraction. So I have multiplying of my negative numbers. So I need to clear away my number line. And I'm going to start at minus 2. And I'm going to do the number part first. So I'm going to start with this number here, and it's minus 2. And I multiply by minus 2. So let's deal with the number part of what I'm multiplying by first. That means I'm going to get twice as far away from the origin. So I'm going to go 2 times as far, so I should end up at minus 4. But because we multiply by a minus 2, that means we rotate. After doing that, we end up rotating around so that we end up at plus 4. 4 minus 10 plus 4. And now we can do our addition. So we have 4 minus 10. So we start at 4 on our number line and go 10 spaces colder. We go 10 spaces colder on down to minus 6. 4. And from minus 6 plus 4, well, that means we're going to get 4 places warmer. So we're going to move 4 places warmer, and we're going to end up at minus 2. Now we have 5 plus minus 3. Now usually we would write that as 5 plus minus 3 in brackets, but sometimes we miss that. For whatever reason, the question might be phrased differently or written differently. So we're going to leave it as this. We have 5 and we're adding on negative 3. So that means this is effectively multiply, so let's do this first. We're adding on -3. That means that if we would be adding on this business of moving 3 spaces colder. So that's the same as 5 minus 3. Let's start at 5 and get 3 places colder. So 5, we go 3 spaces colder. That's going to bring us down to 2. And we keep everything in context all the time. Now we have some brackets. So we have to do what's inside the brackets. We have to simplify our brackets first. So let's do our bit in brackets for our next question. So we have -7 plus 8. So we start at -7 and we add 8. We get 8 spaces warmer. So we end up with 1. We have -6 plus 1. Well, adding on plus 1 just means plus 1. That's effectively our multiply done. And now we're at -6 and we want to add 1. So we're doing these in separate steps, and by doing it bit by bit, the question is very manageable. So we get warmer by 1 and we end up at -5. Next we have -4 minus plus 3. So we have to do this multiply. There's effectively a hidden bracket around here. So let's deal with that. We have minus plus 3. So we're at plus 3 and we multiply by a minus. Well, that rotates us around the origin and brings us down to -3. So we have -4 minus 3, and now we start at -4 and we're going to -3 and see where we end up. So we're at -4 and we -3 and we end up down at -7. We get colder by 3 spaces, so we end up down at -7. We have -12 divided by 6 plus -3. So -12 divided by 6. We'd start at -12 and we divide by 6. We'd end up a sixth as far away from the origin. And my number line isn't actually quite big enough. So I'm going to put in little marks here. So that's -11, -12. And I'm going to end up a sixth as far away from the origin. So still in the same direction, but a sixth as far away. So I'm going to end up, a sixth of my 12 is going to be 2. So I'm going to end up down at -2. So I have my division done, and I can do my multiply as well. So plus -3 means I'm adding on -3. I'm adding on -3, which is the same as subtracting 3. So I start at -2 now. I can do my addition. -2 and -3 ends up down at -5. So by doing that in little steps, I'm able to keep track of everything. I do this part as a separate sum, this part as a separate sum, keep everything written together, and I don't make any mistakes when I do that. And then finally we have our brackets, but we also have an indice on it. Well, we still have to simplify our brackets first. So we start at 4 and we -7. So we start at 4 and -7. Well, we were 4 up from the origin, 4 up from 0, and we -7. That means we get 7 spaces colder. We end up down at -3. So we have -3 to be squared. And now, what does that mean? Well, the squared means multiply whatever is in the bracket by itself 2 times. So we end up with -3 by -3 2 times. So we start at -3 and we multiply by the number part first. So we're going to end up with 3 times as far away from the origin. So that's twice as far away. That's 3 times as far away. So we've gone 3 times as far away from the origin, but we also multiplied by a negative. So we have to rotate around and we end up at +9. And that is what we need for now.